Anything I can do, Alice?
Not a thing, Mrs. Brady.
That should help.
Help what?
Mr. Brady's disposition.
For 5 seasons, a blended family of 8 lived in one of the most recognizable houses in America, and nearly every person inside it was hiding something the cameras never caught. The father figure spent his entire run trying to get himself fired, and the secret he carried killed him before anyone understood what it actually was. The mother gave America the version of a parent she always wished she'd had, then spent her final public appearance cheering on the daughter she'd practically raised twice. The housekeeper everyone loved walked away from Hollywood entirely to live in a religious commune and never looked back. The oldest daughter became the most quietly devastating story in the entire cast, an addiction so severe it cost her a role from Steven Spielberg himself. And 2 of the kids who grew up fighting for attention on screen ended up, decades later, not speaking to each other off it. This was supposed to be the most wholesome family on television. Almost none of them got the wholesome ending. Let's see what really happened. Robert Reed as Mike Brady. Robert Reed was born John Robert Reitz Jr. on October 19, 1932, in Highland Park, Illinois, and trained as a classical Shakespearean actor at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art in London before American television ever found him. He was 36 years old when he became Mike Brady, the calm, endlessly patient architect who somehow had the perfect answer for every crisis 6 kids could invent. He was not the producer's first choice. Gene Hackman was considered for the role and passed over for being too unknown at the time. Reed got the part largely because the studio already had him under contract. From the very first season, Reed made it clear he thought the show was beneath him. He fought constantly with creator Sherwood Schwartz, sending handwritten memos explaining why a storyline didn't make logical sense, and tried to get himself fired multiple times in that first year alone. It finally happened, in a sense, on his own terms. For the show's would-be series finale, Reed refused to film a storyline about hair tonic accidentally turning Greg's hair orange, calling it ridiculous, and was written out of the episode entirely. He never appeared in what became, unbeknownst to anyone at the time, the Brady Bunch's actual series finale. Here is what almost nobody watching at home knew. Robert Reed was a gay man living in an industry and an era that would have ended his career the moment it became public. His co-star Florence Henderson said later that he was an unhappy person, and that living that double life was taking a visible toll on him throughout the run of the show. In November 1991, Reed was diagnosed with colon cancer. He allowed almost no one to visit him while he was sick, only his daughter and one close friend. Weeks before he died, he called Florence Henderson and asked her to personally tell the rest of the Brady children that he was terminally ill. Robert Reed died on May 12, 1992, in Pasadena, California. He was 59 years old. His death certificate, made public shortly afterward, revealed something his official cause of death hadn't. He had been HIV positive, and the virus had accelerated the cancer that killed him. The man who spent 5 years trying to escape playing television's most perfect father had, the entire time, been quietly carrying something far heavier than any script ever gave him room to show. Florence Henderson as Carol Brady. Florence Henderson was born February 14, 1934, in Dale, Indiana, the youngest of 10 children in a family too poor to keep her, and was sent at age 12 to live and study at a Catholic boarding school. By 19, her voice had carried her into a starring role in the Broadway musical Fanny, and by 1962, she had become the first woman ever to guest host The Tonight Show. She was 35 years old when she became Carol Brady, a character she later said she built deliberately, modeling the warmth she wished she'd had growing up. Off camera, she was flying back to New York almost every weekend during the entire run of the show just to spend time with her own 4 children, splitting her life between 2 coasts to make sure she didn't become the kind of parent Carol Brady never was. She also carried a heart condition from childhood that nearly killed her decades later. In her late 60s, she went into cardiac arrest and underwent emergency surgery to repair a mitral valve, an episode she rarely discussed publicly. On November 21, 2016, Florence Henderson appeared at the Dancing with the Stars finale, not to compete, but to cheer on her real-life television daughter, Maureen McCormick, who was a contestant that season. It was warm, it was full circle, and it was the last public appearance of her life. 3 days later, she was hospitalized. Florence Henderson died of heart failure on November 24, 2016, at age 82. Maureen McCormick had spent time with her just days before, and later said the biggest lessons of her own adult life came from watching Florence find joy no matter what she was carrying. Carol Brady was the mother who always seemed to have the answer. Florence Henderson spent her final days, fittingly, still showing up for one of her kids. Ann B. Davis as Alice Nelson. Ann Bradford Davis was born May 3, 1926, in Schenectady, New York, and originally enrolled at the University of Michigan, intending to study medicine before falling into theater. Her first major break came over a decade before the Bradys, playing the sharp-tongued secretary Schultze on The Bob Cummings Show, a role that won her 2 Emmy Awards. She was 43 years old when she became Alice Nelson, the housekeeper who somehow managed every crisis in a house full of 8 people for a fraction of what any of them were earning. By most accounts, Davis genuinely loved the experience, unlike several of her castmates. But after the show ended, she made a decision almost no one in Hollywood makes. In 1976, she sold her house in Los Angeles entirely and moved to Denver, Colorado, to join a multi-family Episcopal religious commune led by Bishop William Fry, where she would live in community with other families for the rest of her life. "I'm convinced we all have a God-shaped space in us," she told People magazine, "and until we fill that space with God, we'll never know what it is to be whole." She still returned for nearly every Brady reunion project that came along over the following decades, cameoing as a truck driver in the 1995 Brady Bunch movie and publishing her own cookbook of recipes contributed by the cast. On May 31, 2014, Davis suffered a fall at her home in San Antonio, Texas, where she had lived with Bishop Fry and his wife since 1976 and never regained consciousness. She died the following day, June 1, 2014, at 88 years old. Florence Henderson said she'd spoken with her just a couple of months earlier and that Davis had sounded great. Alice Nelson spent the show keeping everyone else's house in order. Ann B. Davis spent the back half of her own life having finally found the order she'd been quietly looking for the whole time. Maureen McCormick as Marcia Brady. Maureen McCormick was born August 5, 1956, in Encino, California, the youngest child and only daughter of a local schoolteacher father and a mother whose own family history was marked by tragedy McCormick wouldn't fully understand until much later. She was 12 years old when she became Marcia Brady, the oldest daughter and, almost instantly, the most idolized teenage girl on American television. What audiences never saw. As a teenager, McCormick was already hiding crippling insecurity behind Marcia's effortless popularity, and by 17, had developed bulimia after a casual conversation with friends about purging ice cream without gaining weight. Around age 18, she developed a cocaine addiction so severe that, by her own account in her 2008 memoir, she would sometimes trade sex for drugs to keep the high going. In 1980, riding a 3-day cocaine binge with no sleep, she showed up to audition for Steven Spielberg for a role in Raiders of the Lost Ark and was unable to perform. She lost the role, and her standing with one of the most powerful directors in Hollywood in a single afternoon. Her rock bottom came years later when she missed an audition for a Brady spin-off after another multi-day binge. Her own agent climbed a ladder to break into her bedroom and physically pulled her out of a closet. McCormick has said the addiction was rooted partly in family history she spent her whole childhood hiding. Her maternal grandmother died in a psychiatric hospital, her grandfather died by suicide 1 week later, and her own mother had lived with severe agoraphobia for years. McCormick got sober in 1985 after meeting her husband, Michael Cummings, a man who, remarkably, had never seen or even heard of the Brady Bunch before they met. She has now been sober for more than 4 decades. Her 2008 memoir, Here's the Story, became a New York Times bestseller and also reignited an old rivalry. McCormick's claim in the book that she and on-screen sister Eve Plumb once kissed led Plumb to publicly accuse her of fabricating the story to sell books, a falling out serious enough that it reportedly killed a planned 2010 cast reunion because neither woman would be in the same room. Today, McCormick continues to perform, most recently in off-Broadway theater. Marcia Brady was the girl every other girl on television wanted to be. Maureen McCormick spent the decades afterward proving that the harder thing was surviving being her. Eve Plumb as Jan Brady. Eve Plumb was born April 29, 1958, in Burbank, California, into a show business family. Her father was a music producer and her mother a dancer. She was 11 years old when she became Jan Brady, the middle daughter forever defined on screen by jealousy of her older sister, a storyline so famous the phrase, "Marcia, Marcia, Marcia," outlived the show itself. In a quiet irony, Plumb's actual career choices after the Bradys read like someone determined to never be compared to Marcia again. She turned down the variety show spin-off that reunited most of the cast because she didn't want to sign a 5-year contract, and instead, in 1976, took the lead role in the NBC television movie Dawn, Portrait of a Teenage Runaway, playing a teenage prostitute. It was about as far from Jan Brady as a former child star could possibly go, and Plumb has said directly that she believes it's the reason she kept working steadily as an adult actress when so many of her castmates struggled to. In the 1990s, she quietly built an entirely second career as a fine art painter, working out of a home studio, and her work is now represented by serious commercial galleries in New York, Scottsdale, and Fort Lauderdale. When the cast reunited in 2019 to restore the actual Brady house for HGTV's A Very Brady renovation, it was Plumb's painting background that let her hand recreate several of the original 1970s artworks that had been lost from the set decades earlier. In April 2026, at age 67, she published her own memoir, Happiness Included, Jan Brady and Beyond, with a foreword written by her TV brother Christopher Knight, the two of them having quietly maintained a real friendship for decades, including a standing monthly video cocktail hour with their spouses, kept entirely off the nostalgia circuit. Asked recently how she defines success, Plumb said simply that she's made the right choices so far. Jan Brady spent the show desperate to be seen as more than just the middle sister. Eve Plumb spent the next 50 years quietly becoming exactly that. Susan Olsen as Cindy Brady. Susan Marie Olsen was born August 14, 1961, in Santa Monica, California, the youngest of 4 children, with 3 older siblings who had each tried acting and quit before she ever got the chance. She was 8 years old when she became Cindy Brady, the youngest and most innocent voice in the house, known for a lisp so charming that producers wrote it directly into the character. The lisp was real, and so was the price for it. Real school kids mocked her mercilessly after an episode where Cindy tattles on her siblings, unable to separate the actress from the character, and Olsen later underwent oral surgery as a child, specifically to correct the speech pattern that had made her famous. After the show, Olsen deliberately stepped back from acting around age 23, working for a decade as a graphic designer and children's book illustrator instead, later becoming a radio host and an outspoken animal welfare advocate who personally hand-raises homeless newborn kittens. In December 2016, Olsen was fired from her Los Angeles talk radio job after a public social media confrontation with a gay actor turned into an exchange that included a homophobic slur. She later apologized to the LGBT community while maintaining the firing was actually political retaliation for her support of Donald Trump. She has remained a vocal, polarizing political commentator in the years since. Her son, named Michael after her TV brother Mike Lookinland, was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome in 2004. Cindy Brady was the baby of the house, the one who always told the truth, even when nobody wanted to hear it. Susan Olsen has spent the decades since proving she never really stopped doing exactly that, for better and for worse. Barry Williams as Greg Brady. Barry William Blankhorn was born September 30, 1954, in Santa Monica, California, the youngest of 3 boys. He was 14 years old when he became Greg Brady, the oldest son, the smooth-talking ladies' man who, despite dating constantly on screen, never once got an actual kiss in 117 episodes. Off-screen was a different story entirely. Williams developed a teenage crush on his TV mother, Florence Henderson, 20 years his senior, and at 15 actually took her on what he considered a real date, to see a singer at a club near Beverly Hills, capped off with a goodnight kiss. Henderson, married at the time, has said she viewed the whole evening as entirely innocent and was simply trying to gently let her teenage co-star down. The rumor that it was something more followed her for decades anyway. Williams also began a real, on-and-off romantic relationship with his on-screen sister, Maureen McCormick, sparked during location filming in Hawaii. He later said almost the entire younger cast paired off with each other at some point over the years. He wasn't shy about substance use either, admitting decades later that he once showed up to film an episode while high on marijuana, joking that he's a much better actor completely sober. After the show, Williams pursued musical theater seriously, eventually starring in national tours of Pippin, Grease, and West Side Story, and built a one-man stage show built almost entirely around embracing, rather than running from, being Greg Brady. His 1992 memoir, Growing Up Brady, spent months on the New York Times bestseller list and detailed the Henderson rumors and the McCormick relationship for the first time in his own words. He said it took him roughly 15 years to stop resenting strangers calling him Greg in public, describing it at the time as feeling like a threat to his own identity, before eventually making peace with it. In 2026, at 71 years old, Williams is set to appear on the celebrity reality series I'm a Celebrity, still performing, still touring, more than 50 years after the role first made him famous. Greg Brady was the golden boy who never got the girl on screen. Barry Williams spent his entire life since proving he never needed the script's permission to get one in real life. Christopher Knight as Peter Brady. Christopher Anton Knight was born November 7, 1957, in Manhattan, New York, the son of an actor father, and was 12 years old when he became Peter Brady, the middle son most famous for the episode where his voice comically cracked mid-sentence, a storyline based on Knight's own real adolescence happening in real time on camera. By his own description, Knight was always a self-professed geek who never felt at home in show business the way some of his castmates did. In 1988, he walked away from acting almost entirely to enter the computer industry, starting as an account sales manager and hitting $1 million in sales within his first 18 months. He went on to found multiple companies, including a 3D software firm, an educational technology company, and a television tuner manufacturer, eventually becoming a genuine, multi-company tech entrepreneur, completely outside the entertainment industry that made him famous as a child. Then, in 2005, the cameras found him again. At 48 years old, Knight met 23-year-old Adrienne Curry, winner of the first season of America's Next Top Model, on the VH1 reality series The Surreal Life. Their relationship, engagement, and eventual marriage were filmed for 3 full seasons of a spin-off series literally titled My Fair Brady. They married in 2006. 5 years later, on their actual wedding anniversary, they announced their separation. Curry has since said she's grateful for how it ended, having since remarried and moved off the grid in rural Montana. Knight, married a third time, eventually returned to building businesses, most recently launching an online home furnishings company with operations across multiple countries. He maintains a close, quiet, decades-long friendship with his TV sister Eve Plumb to this day. Peter Brady was the awkward middle child whose voice cracked at the worst possible moment on national television. Christopher Knight spent the rest of his life proving that awkward kid was actually the smartest person in the entire house. Mike Lookinland as Bobby Brady. Michael Paul Lookinland was born December 19, 1960, in Mount Pleasant, Utah, and was just 9 years old when he became Bobby Brady, the youngest brother, the one most often at the center of the show's slapstick, including the football-to-the-nose moment that's still replayed in clip compilations decades later. Lookinland has said publicly that the cast was paid astonishingly little for how famous the show eventually became, joking years later that it's exactly why he needed a real job afterward. And he built one, deliberately, behind the camera rather than in front of it. He spent nearly a decade working as a television camera operator in Utah, doing whatever production jobs he could find to build experience, including a stint dressing sets with plants on the set of Halloween 4. In his early 20s, Lookinland battled alcohol addiction privately, eventually completing a short stay in rehab and remaining sober ever since. He met his wife Kelly at the University of Utah, and they've been married since 1987. Rather than chase any further acting fame, Lookinland founded his own architectural concrete business, Just Add Water, based in Salt Lake City, building decorative concrete countertops with his own son for a living, a long way from a Hollywood soundstage. In recent years, he's also performed regularly with a Grateful Dead tribute band, just for the joy of it. He returned for the 2019 HGTV special, A Very Brady Renovation, alongside his original castmates, helping restore the real house behind the show's exteriors, and reunited again for a 2021 Lifetime Christmas movie with several former co-stars. Bobby Brady was the family's smallest voice, easy to overlook in a house of 8. Mike Lookinland built a quiet, steady, entirely self-made life that asked for no one's attention at all, and got exactly the peace he seemed to want. That's the Brady Bunch, then and now, 57 years after a blended family of 8 first walked into that California split level and became one of the most rerun shows in television history. 4 of the original 9 are gone, Robert Reed in 1992, carrying a secret the show never let him reveal. Ann B. Davis in 2014, having traded Hollywood for a religious commune decades earlier and never once looking back. Florence Henderson in 2016, her very last public appearance spent cheering for one of her kids. And somewhere in between, a cast that looked perfectly matched on screen, split into genuine friendships, decades-long silences, addictions nobody saw coming, and second careers in poker rooms, concrete shops, and tech startups that had absolutely nothing to do with the house that made them famous. Drop a comment. Which Brady's real story surprised you the most? And here's the real question. Do you think a family that perfect could have ever existed anywhere except on a soundstage? Or is the real lesson here that every perfect family you've ever envied was probably hiding just as much as this one was? Because once you know what these 9 people carried behind that staircase, Marcia sounds a whole lot different. If this brought back that theme song and that famous 9 square opening, you know exactly what to do.